August 21st, 1959. Hawaii is the 50th, and so far, final state to enter the United States of America. In the nearly 60 years since this event, many have asked, what's next? First off, a quick explanation of what would be required to become a state. While far more in-depth explanations exist, here's the basics. Approval from Congress is obviously necessary, and while votes can vary based on who's in office, it's generally accepted that 3 rules give a statehood movement real momentum. First off, over 50% of the population should support the movement. Next, the population should agree with the values of American democracy. And finally, the territory should be able to support itself and its share in the federal government. Simple enough? Okay, so as you may expect, there isn't an abundance of choices. The days of manifest destiny are long gone, and so the obvious first thought goes to an island. Usually this one. Puerto Rico. One of America's prizes after the Spanish-American War, the island of Puerto Rico has been in a somewhat awkward place. For most purposes, it and its people are distinctively American. American citizenship, American wars, you get the point. So, isn't statehood just around the corner? The reality of the situation is complicated. While on the surface, Puerto Rico seems like a very likely candidate for statehood, several major factors block its path. The high homicide rate and drug issues in the territory were an often quoted statistic, but moving beyond that, it's quite apparent that Puerto Rico, on a cultural level, is quite distinct from that of the American homeland. The territory is officially bilingual, with Spanish being the primary language. While this affects the legislature, the population at large has an even more drastic difference from the rest of America. What I mean is that, according to the US Census, 80% of the population is not fluent in English. Quite a large language barrier not seen elsewhere on a state level. By comparison, the only state that is bilingual officially in the United States is Hawaii, but even so, over 70% of its residents speak only English at home. So that's a big cultural shift, and while many others exist, that's not the primary point I intend to make. After all, there is nothing keeping a territory out because of language. Culture isn't what keeps Puerto Rico from statehood. It's the economy. Over 40% of the population lives in poverty, about 3 times the rate of America as a whole. The unemployment rate nearly doubles that of the American average. A climbing debt and economic instability led to the territory filing for the largest bankruptcy in American history, and this, if anything else, is the nail in the coffin for statehood. As discussed earlier, a state is expected to support itself and its part in the federal government. Bankruptcy doesn't really fit into this definition very well. So, if not Puerto Rico, where else can we look for a 51st state? One of the other most noted locations is Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. It fits the criteria quite well. 85% of the population supports the movement, they do seem to be quite fond of American democracy, and the gross product of D.C. would land it at 34th place out of all the states. So, what's the issue? Obviously, Washington, D.C. houses the federal government. If D.C. were to be a state, the federal government would be, in some capacity, held to the regulations and laws of another power, which itself would be held to the regulation of the federal government. Impossible? Impractical? Probably not, but it's not a simple fix, and could require some pretty immense changes to statehood and state law. At the same time, the movement has been loosely tied to political parties. With statehood comes seats in Congress, and the urban DC metropolis would likely vote Democrat. This is understood well by each party, and has become a partisan issue rather than a logistical issue in the eyes of many. And with a population of under 700,000, it won't likely garner a huge reaction across the other 50 states. So while DC awaits its statehood, or lack thereof, where else can we look for new states? Again, without the aforementioned manifest destiny, state division becomes the likely course of action. Areas of current states that, whether over political or cultural differences, seek separation from their governing overlords. One such movement was the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, wanting separation from, well, Michigan. Naming itself Superior, off of the lake, it was a movement based around the fact that this area was separated by the Mackinac Strait until the late 1950s, meaning that a drive from Upper Michigan to Lower would require going through Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Once the Mackinac Bridge was constructed, the divide was, well, bridged and mainstream support died out. A more modern proposal is Jefferson, which would lie in Northern California and Southern Oregon. This area tends to vote Republican, which contrasts very heavily with the liberal California and Oregon state governments. Of course, having a state formed from two others is a giant political mess that would be completely unrealistic in any reasonable time frame. Support grew even further after the recent California secession movement popped up. However, the succession of California is quite virtually impossible. I'm not going to that right now. Unlike the others, we have a flag for this proposed state, which features two X's. These are said to represent the conflicts with California and Oregon. The gold circle in the center is a mining pan due to, well, obvious reasons. Now the final proposal I want to look at is a bit more strange. That's New York City leaving New York. It all starts with a Democratic mayor candidate, Norman Mailer, the year 1969. Having a platform based on the division of the city from the state, Mailer had some unconventional plans. The platform proposed banning privately owned cars from Manhattan. All transportation would be from cabs and buses, and new parking lots would allow outsiders to park before entering. The major flaws of inner-city education were to be solved by simply allowing each area to teach whatever they wanted, with nothing defining how things are graded or who is considered a competent teacher. Each local area would hire cops who they thought would be the best aid for the area. I'm sure no corruption could possibly happen with this. And more absurdly, once a month, a sweet Sunday would ban all transportation for a day, everywhere. This was to help the environment and give people an opportunity to just sit down and talk. Yeah, he lost. Will we see a 51st state anytime soon? Probably not. Whether it be impractical, illogical, or just strange, it's not likely that any of these proposals will be validated anytime soon. Regardless, anything could happen. Except for Sweet Sunday. This is Tyler of Knowledge Hub.